Hello YouTube and welcome to Prime Productions. I'm here to help enhance your tabletop gaming experience. If you're new to this channel, I primarily focus on Paizo tabletop role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And of course I have a Patreon and Discord, more info at the end of the video. So I recently got my hands on an early review copy of Paizo's newest book, Impossible Magic, and while I did get an early review copy, there were no strings attached, and Paizo is in no other way compensating me. Anyway, this book is chock full of a bunch of new things. The big issue is, of course, the two new classes, the long-awaited necromancer and runesmith. However, there are also two returning classes that have been updated for the remaster, the magus and the summoner. There's also a slew of new archetypes, some new wizard schools, a bunch of new spells in addition to spells that have been updated for the remaster, a bunch of new magic items. It's a lot. And that's not even to mention the whole new type of magic, impossible magic. I'm not going to be able to cover everything in this video, so today I'm just going to focus on the new classes. Now, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about each class, and then at the end of that section, I'll give my thoughts on that class, and then I'll have a kind of final overall thoughts about all of the classes at the end of the video. Oh, and obviously I won't be able to touch on everything or we'd be here all day, so I'm just going to give you a kind of bird's eye view. So how I'm going to tackle the remastered classes is that I will tell you how they worked pre-remaster, then I'll go over the broad remaster changes because some of them are pretty big. I know most of you probably already know these classes, but I think doing it this way will highlight the differences. First up, we have the remastered magus. So the pre-remaster magus is a pretty interesting beast. The class fantasy of the magus is pure gish, that is to say they are decent in both magic and martial combat, you know, swords and bows and stuff. Jack of all trades, master of none, that kind of deal. But they can combine their swords and sorcery to do devastating spell strikes. They learn spells like wizards, that is to say arcane spells, intelligence-based, spellbook, the works. However, they are also good in combat, about as accurate as a ranger or monk or barbarian, in that vein. To make up for this, pre-remaster maguses only got a few spells a day, basically 2 at their highest rank and 2 at their next highest rank, plus cantrips. This is called bounded casting by the community. Note the lack of rank 10 spells. Now they did get a few extra lower ranked spells when they got to higher levels, but these spells were from a curated list. This ability was called Studious Spell. They also had 8 HP per level, meaning that they tended to be less sturdy than a ranger or a monk or whatnot. The Magus's big claim to fame was their Spell Strike, a 2-action activity that let them cast a spell and strike with a melee weapon. If the strike hit, the spell also hit, dealing a bunch of damage. This, combined with their low hit points, made them big glass cannons, though they could tank if they had proper support from the party and their party was on top of things. Now there were a few restrictions on spell strikes. Firstly, spell strikes used to be restricted to attack roll spells only, such as telekinetic projectile or ignition, though there was a feat that changed this called expansive spell strike. Secondly, after each spell strike, they had to recharge their spell strike, get it back in some way. They could either spend an action to get it back, or each magus subclass had a focus spell that got their spell strike back in addition to doing something else. 2 more things. One was called Arcane Cascade. Basically, after casting a spell, you could enter a stance where you did more damage, based on the spell you cast. So if you cast Ignition, a fire spell, that let you do extra fire damage, for example. Lastly, there were several magus subclasses, each of which gave you some special abilities and determined your focus spell that you recharged your spell strike with. Each subclass was geared around one type of combat. Twisting Tree turned your spell staff into a bow staff. Sparkling Targe made you better with shields. Starlit Span let you spell strike at range, that kind of thing. So how does the new magus stack up? Well, first off, the big change is that maguses now get 2 spells per spell rank, similar to a psychic, though they are still prepared spellcasters with spell books. However, note that unlike psychics, they still do not gain a rank 10 spell slot. Because of this, Studious Spell has been updated, and now if you cast one of a few spells such as Gecko Grip, you can enter Arcane Cascade for free. It's a bit more complicated than that. I'll put the rules on screen if you want to pause the video and read. Another big change is that you can now spell strike with save spells, no expansive spell strike feat required, though now spell strikes only affect one individual. So, if you spell strike with, say, Fireball, you only deal fire damage to the one guy you hit. However, the expansive spell strike feat now lets your area effect spells affect more than one person if you use spell strike with expansive spell strike. So, for example, spell striking with lightning bolt can cause a lightning bolt to go off from the guy you hit. However, do note that the target of your spell strike is still always the target of the spell. So if you spell strike, say, haste, the dude you bonked gets hasted, not you. Note that this is different than Pathfinder 1st Edition, where you could strike someone and cast a spell on yourself at the same time. Back on topic, Arcane Cascade has also changed, no longer needing a spell to enter the stance. Now you can just enter Arcane Cascade to do bonus force damage, though if you do cast a spell before entering Arcane Cascade, the bonus damage switches from force to whatever type of spell you did damage with, so that's nice. Lastly, there are two new subclasses, one for dual weapon wielding called Twofold Time, and Volatile Spark, which is geared towards firearms. Of course, these new subclasses have new focus spells and new feats. Recharging Flurry is a feat that gives you a 2-action activity that allows Twofold Time Magi to strike twice and also recharge their spell strike, 3 actions for the cost of 2. I also want to point out the feat Split Spell Strike, which lets you spell strike 2 different people, one with each weapon in your hands, so long as the spell you used can hit multiple people, like Electric Arc. On the Volatile Spark Magus side of things, they can recharge spell strike when reloading, so pretty good action compression all around. So how does the new Magus stack up to the old? Well, obviously there are a lot of upgrades here. Just having the base parts of Expansive Spell Strike as a base ability instead of a feat you need to take is huge. This way you can do things like Spell Strike Slow or Laughing Fit. Side note, because if I don't mention it, I know people in the comments will yell at me, the whole all Maguses can spell strike with save spells without expansive spell strike was an errata that got dropped before this book. The book just kind of finally put it into actual print. I'm kind of on two minds about the 2 spells per spell rank thing. I mean, obviously it's an upgrade, duh. But I don't know if the Magus needed it. After all, cantrips scale pretty well, and so spell striking with, say, a rank 1 spell at character level 7 is probably going to do less damage than spell striking with telekinetic projectile at level 7. So really the extra spells just allow for lower level utility spells like haste or slow, or other spells that are useful like jump or water walk. I mean, it's nice, don't get me wrong, I'm just not sure it was needed. One thing I am happy about is Arcane Cascade. I've played a Magus or 2 in my day, and getting into Arcane Cascade is always a chore. Sure, under ideal circumstances, you can cast Shield, enter Arcane Cascade, and then go to town. But if your party gets ambushed, or if you need to get to the MacGuffin right friggin' now, often you might need to run over to a place, use an action to pick up a MacGuffin, and I've had fights where I haven't been able to enter Arcane Cascade until turns 3 or 4. Overall, a lot of little things lead to a pretty big power upgrade, and again, I'm not sure it was needed. I've played through all of the Adventure Path Sky King's Tomb, and my friend played a Magus as the main tank, and he did fine. I don't think he needed all those extra spells or to change Arcane Cascade. Those limitations forced him to think tactically, and I think he enjoyed the challenge. Like I said, obviously it's an upgrade, but Magus was already pretty good, and I'm not sure it was needed. I would have rather have seen these kind of power boosts go to the Inventor or the Psychic, as many in the community consider those the classes that need the most help. I do want to talk for a quick second about the 2 new subclasses. I know it's not the greatest, but I do love the dual weapon Magus, just because I know a lot of people like 2-weapon fighting, so having a 2-weapon fighting Gish spellcaster is going to tickle a lot of people's fancy. And the Volatile Spark Magus is giving serious Gun Witch vibes, which is something the community has wanted ever since an NPC Gun Witch showed up in NPC Core. And yes, there's a gunslinger that can kind of spell strike, but that build is better at guns than spellcasting, and the Magus is the opposite, and it's nice to have a few options. Next up, we have the Summoner. The class fantasy here is that your character has bonded to some extraplanar being, which gives them not only a powerful melee ally, but also access to spells through their magical extraplanar connection. Pre-remaster summoners were pretty wild. They were a rare 10 HP per level spellcaster class, and they kind of worked like sorcerers in that they were a charisma-based, spontaneous spellcaster, and they got to choose which magical tradition they had. Like the magus, they had that bounded casting thing, except they didn't get studious spell, which means they didn't get those bonus lower ranked spells. To make up for this, they got an eidolon, which was their big thing. By the way, apparently the correct pronunciation is eidolon, but I grew up saying eidolon, so I will try to say eidolon, but if I switch back and forth, I apologize. Anyway, an eidolon is a magical creature you can summon that can fight with you. Unlike normal summons, it doesn't take a spell slot to get one out, and they have an unlimited duration, and you two share hit points. There's a big complicated thing about them where, like, if the two of you are caught in, say, a fireball, you both roll saves, and if you both, for example, fail, you only take the damage once. But if one crit succeeds and one crit fails, you still take the crit fail damage. I'll leave the text on screen so you can pause the video and read about it. Additionally, if your eidolon strays too far, or your combined HP pool reaches 0, or if you fall unconscious, then your eidolon disappears, and you have to resummon them with a 3-action activity. Now, you and your eidolon share actions, kinda, sorta. Okay, you do actually share actions, but you also get this ability called Act Together that lets you do some actions, and then your eidolon gets to do one action for free, or vice versa. This is a roundabout way of giving you 4 actions around, again, kinda, sorta. It's a bit messy, and it's on screen now for those who want the nitty-gritty. However, as a side effect, this does let you and your eidolon each do separate exploration activities, which is super nice. Double the set of eyes looking for traps, that sort of thing. Your eidolon is kind of a martial character. Your attacks and damage tend to be a bit behind an actual martial character like a ranger, but hey, you get to play a spellcaster and a melee beatstick at once, so being a little underpowered in both fields is to be expected. A summoner's subclass determines the type of eidolon that they have, and the summoner's magic tradition, and the eidolon's base stats. For example, a Fey eidolon makes the summoner a primal spellcaster. An Angel eidolon makes the caster a divine caster. You get it. Now, your eidolon can look like anything you want as long as it's within the realm of your field. So a beast eidolon could look like a bear or reindeer or some never-before-seen creature, but it can't make it look like an ooze or whatever. Side note, that's why I like construct eidolons, because they can look like a robot version of whatever you want. You can always telepathically communicate with your eidolon, and you can look through their eyes as an activity, and the two of you share the same skills, though there is a feat to give the two of you some skills that the other doesn't have. Side note, this is why my summoner ended up requesting everyone speak to her My Little Pony eidolon, because the unicorn had diplomacy and my summoner did not. Eidolons cannot wear equipment except for eidolon-specific gear, but they do benefit from some of your gear, like weapons and armor and skill-increasing items. It's a bit more complicated, again, on screen if you want to pause the video and read. Lastly, Summoner does get some special cantrips and focus spells and can pick up more with feats that let them increase their combat effectiveness with their eidolon. And of course, as you level up, obviously your eidolon gains new abilities, and you can pick up summoner feats to give your eidolon even more abilities, such as giving your eidolon the ability to fly or giving them their own spells. So, what has changed for the new summoner? Well, not much, at least not compared to what changed for the magus. Like the magus, the summoner now gets 2 spells per spell rank instead of that bounded casting. Other than that, not a whole lot has changed. They cleaned up how the eidolons work so that their stat blocks aren't so cumbersome. They added some clarifications about what happens if an eidolon isn't manifested currently, but other than that, not a whole lot of changes. A couple of things did change for the subclasses. Notably, the demon eidolon no longer requires you to be evil. Yes, I know alignment is no longer a thing in the Pathfinder Remaster, but I guess it no longer has an anathema or an edict or anything. So you can play a good guy shackled to a demon against your will, which is a cool character concept. Also, The Undead Eidolon, which was released in a different book. Eidolons were released in Secret of Magic. The Undead Eidolon was released in Book of the Dead. Anyway, the Undead Eidolon is included in Impossible Magic for free. I will say that there is one new subclass, the Ooze Eidolon. It's not a full ooze, it doesn't have the ooze abilities, though it does resist poison and precision damage. Also, side note, you can give your ooze the flight and mount abilities and ride it around like an oozy surfboard. I thought that was such a rad idea, I drew a picture. My thoughts? Honestly, I think the summoner is pretty good. I've played a summoner, I've seen them played, and that extra set of hands can be useful in a fight. Plus, that secondary exploration activity is way more useful than you think. For example, you can keep Detect Magic going while your Eidolon provides scouting for a +1 to everyone's initiative. It's pretty good. Honestly, my biggest issue with the summoner was dealing with the disappearing spontaneous spell repertoire, and now the 2 spells per spell rank fixed that. Unlike the magus, I think this change was needed. Final overview? Pretty good. No groundbreaking changes, but a lot of minor fixes that make things more fun. Like that Demon Eidolon thing I mentioned earlier. The first time I saw a Demon Eidolon, I thought it would be fun to play a good guy human bound to a demon, like that anime Chrono Crusade if anyone's ever seen that. So I'm glad it's now an option. I would have liked to have seen things spelled out more on edge cases though, like what if your Eidolon expires not from hit point damage, like a disease unalives them? Does that take out the summoner? Can you just resummon them at full power with 3 actions? Is your Eidolon forever gone and your character can't summon a new partner? I cannot find the definitive answer, even after I asked my Discord server. Alright, let's move on to 2 new classes. First up, the necromancer, who I know a lot of people are champing at the bit to learn about. The class fantasy of the necromancer is that they are a spellcaster who truly delves into the forces of life and death, leading them to blurring the lines between what is life and what is not. They are tougher than wizards and have access to some unique options, but at the expense of sheer magical output. Necromancers are a prepared occult spellcaster that are intelligence-based and have 8 HP per level. Interestingly, they are the first Pathfinder full spellcaster to start with expert in fortitude saves and not will saves. They have all the standard spellcastery things like proficiency in simple weapons and unarmored defense, and actually also light armor. And also stay tuned for more on that later. They also eventually get up to legendary spellcasting proficiency. However, their big deal is they only get 2 spells per spell rank, like a psychic. Note that they do gain a rank 10 spell slot, unlike a magus or a summoner. As standard, they start off trained in their spellcasting tradition, so occultism, and an additional number of skills equal to 2 plus their intelligence modifier. However, to make up for only 2 spells per spell rank, necromancers have an interesting mechanic. They can summon the legions of the undead. Kinda. But before we get to the undead thing real quick, let's cover all the other stuff. Like I said, necromancers are an intelligence-based prepared occult spellcaster, though they do automatically learn the harm spell as if it were an occult spell. They also have a dirge, which is like a funeral song. Their dirge is how they learn new spells. Like a wizard, they learn a new spell as they level up, and they can learn them by reading spell scrolls, but I think the idea is that instead of a spell book, they have like a song going on in their mind, and emphasizing or memorizing certain parts of the song determines what spells they prepare for the day. So it's like an internal spell book that you don't have to pay for. Meaning, I wonder if one necromancer can even teach another necromancer a spell since they can't show them their dirge. I'll have to ask Paizo about that. Now they still can do the learn a spell activity, which still costs money, presumably for burning incense or scribbling down notes as they try to fit their new spell into their dirge, but the flavor is left up to you. Related to spellcasting, whenever a necromancer casts a spell that either does vitality or void damage, they can choose for it to do either vitality or void damage for each creature that it affects. They can also have spells that only affect the living or undead, affect both kinds of creatures. So, the obvious use for this is spells like Void Warp, which does void damage, can now deal vitality damage to undead. But also, if they cast 3 action harm, they can have it deal vitality damage to all their living friends, and since living creatures are immune to vitality damage, they'd be fine. Now note that the opposite is not true. They cannot choose to heal with vitality or void, so if you want to heal someone, you'll have to stick to the soothe spell. I did a whole video about vitality and void healing and damage. Additionally, necromancers get access to the undead lore skill. Now, Paizo has gone back and forth if undead lore is a valid option for a lore skill or not. It seems that as of necromancer, they have decided that you cannot normally pick up undead lore as a standard lore skill, and you have to do something like be a necromancer to get this unusually broad lore skill. Note that it's called a special lore skill. This is the wording that Paizo uses whenever a lore skill is something that you cannot normally take with like additional lore. But back on track, the big thing necromancers get is a cantrip called Create Thrall. They can create 2 thralls at a time, or 1 thrall and then command that thrall. Thralls are undead and have like essentially 1 hit point and automatically fail all skill checks and saving throws. Also, all attacks and other things like grapple checks automatically succeed against a thrall. They also don't do anything on their own except help provide flanking. However, by spending an action, you can make a thrall move, do an interact action if it doesn't require a skill check, or strike, which uses your spell attack roll. Now, if that doesn't sound too exciting, there's something else you need to consider. Necromancers get a lot of abilities to destroy a thrall in order to get some effect. For example, the feat Reach of the Dead lets you cast a spell as if you were in the thrall's place, which is kind of like giving you a free action reach spell, but it destroys one of your thralls. I cannot tell you how many focus spells and abilities are related to making and destroying thralls. That is the whole necromancer's bread and butter. Want to make a bone spear to do a line area attack? Sacrifice a thrall. Want to give temporary hit points to the fighter? Sacrifice a thrall. Want to throw a thrall in front of you to shield you from attack? Sacrifice that thrall. Necromancers have 2 different types of subclasses, though one is pretty minor. The big one is what your thralls look like. You can focus on blood, either making them vampiric looking or blood constructs. You can focus on bone, making them skeletons. You can focus on flesh, making them zombies. Or you can focus on spirit and they look like ghosts. Importantly, for the spirit one, for game balance purposes, they are still physical and can't like walk through walls, but they can do non-physical types of damage when they attack. I personally think spirit is the best one, as their attacks can bypass all sorts of resistances, like a swarm's resistance to physical damage. Anyway, each choice gives you a focus spell and a little bonus, like skeletons are faster, or the blood thralls heal you just a little bit. The other subclass is a choice to be either a melee character or a more sit-back spellcastery kind of necromancer. One lets you consume a thrall for a focus point once a day as a free action, though there are restrictions. It also lets you summon an extra thrall when you summon thralls once a round. The other makes you trained in martial weapons and medium armor, and when you summon a thrall as a free action, you can attack once, and remember, your thrall can flank for you. But other than that, there's not a whole lot that the necromancers get. At level 3, they get a class ability to use a reaction to create a thrall when a creature expires. Note it does not say when it is destroyed, so it doesn't work on undead or constructs because those are destroyed. They are also one of the few spellcasters that can get up to legendary in a save, in particular fortitude, but yeah, other than that, a lot of feats to get focus spells or other abilities to mess with your thralls. Now, I know a lot of you are wondering if you can gish with a necromancer or be a melee attacker with spells, and the answer is kinda. The Reaper Necromancer, that's the one with armor and weapon proficiencies, can theoretically summon a thrall to flank and get a free attack with like their scythe or whatever. So that can help. There is also a focus spell called Bind Heroic Spirit that destroys a thrall to give you a +1 to hit and eventually a +2 to hit. So summoning a skeleton for flanking and then striking with a +2 to hit, well, it won't carry you through most boss fights, but I think you could do okay against lower level chaff. I estimate you'd be about as effective in combat as an alchemist or a commander in a fight. The problem is that summoning a thrall to sacrifice and then activating Bind Heroic Spirit is 3 actions, so that's your whole first turn unless you know a fight is coming and can pre-buff. And it's questionable if you can have a thrall out during exploration. They seem pretty slow. Maybe if you made it as your exploration activity? Final thoughts. Honestly, the necromancer looks pretty fun from a gameplay side of things. For people who really enjoy a lot of strategic problem solving, the necromancer seems right up their alley. Figuring out when and where to summon a thrall and then to sacrifice them to get the most effect, keeping track of where your thralls are, and carefully measuring out your action economy, it all seems really fun. I do think there is a chance to really be abusive here, though. If caught in a tight dungeon corridor against a melee-focused enemy, you could just summon hordes of undead to clog up the corridor, and unless your enemy has an area effect attack, they'd have to spend an action to get rid of each and every thrall, which does take up space. All the while, your friends can pelt them with spells or ranged attacks. And obviously, a necromancer is going to be able to counter almost any trap or haunt. Does that MacGuffin look suspicious? Have a thrall pick it up. Rogue having trouble with that trapped door? Have a thrall open it. It just kind of ends one of the major things about dungeons, traps, and haunts. Now thralls can just trigger them, and unless the hazard resets automatically, it kind of just ends the threat, no roll required. But let's move on to the last class of the book, runesmith. So the class fantasy of the runesmith is you are the ultimate item enchanter. Do you remember that part of Lord of the Rings where like elves and dwarves could just craft something so well that you basically made magic items, not through spells and rituals, but just by being an awesome artisan? Yeah, that is a runesmith. Runesmiths are what the community calls a near martial. That means they don't have any spells, at least not technically, and they can get up to master proficiency in weapons and armor. However, their primary ability score is not strength or dexterity, so they can't bonk people with it, so they end up being a little bit less accurate than a dedicated martial like a ranger or a monk. They also get only 8 HP per level instead of the normal martial's 10 or 12. They start off trained in crafting and any one magic tradition skill and are also trained in 2 plus their intelligence modifier number of other skills. Also, as normal for a near martial, they are trained in all simple and martial weapons and light and medium armor. Runesmiths only really have one thing they do: make runes. Seems simple enough. So how this works is that as long as a runesmith has an artisan toolkit on their person, they do not need to have the tools in their hand, they can make runes. There are 2 ways that they can make these runes: etched and traced. Etched runes stick around longer and take 10 minutes to make, but don't damage the item that they are etched onto. Traced runes are fleeting, only take an action or 2, and last until the end of your next turn. So, how do these runes work? So each rune has 2 effects. One is a passive effect that always works. The second effect is what happens when you invoke the rune. So a runesmith can invoke 1 or 2 of their runes as an action, and what that does is activate the second effect. And after that, the rune disappears. Yes, even etched runes disappear if invoked. Let's take a look at the rune of Whetstone as an example. This rune is put onto a weapon. The passive benefit is that hits from this weapon cause scaling 2 points of ongoing bleed damage per damage die. The invoke effect is that the rune explodes, damaging 1 creature that's adjacent to the weapon, runesmith's choice, for scaling D8 weapon damage. There are runes that buff allies, runes that debuff enemies, even runes that go on top of other runes. There are also runes that just really mess up enemies, like the fire rune reduces an enemy's fire resist, and you can invoke it to explode for a bit of damage. However, the frost rune is real nasty, as it reduces an enemy's move speed, and if they take any action with the move trait, they become clumsy, which reduces their AC and maybe bonus to hit. Now you can have as many traced runes as you can get out, remember they disappear at the end of your turn, but you can only have a limited number of etched runes at a time. However, etched runes stick around until you either invoke them or you reach your etched runes limit, and then if you etch another rune, one of your old ones disappears. You can trace a rune onto any creature or object you are adjacent to, no roll required, though it is a manipulate action, so watch out for reactive strike. You can also spend 2 actions to put a rune on something up to 30 feet away. Again, you need an artisan toolkit, but it doesn't need to be in your hands. There's also a feat that lets you sing a rune onto something up to 30 feet away as a single action once in a while. Runesmiths also work a bit like commanders in that they have a repertoire of known runes. This table shows how many runes a runesmith knows and how many etched runes they can have out at one time. There are a few other things to know about runesmiths. At level 2, they get the magical crafting feat and automatically know the formula for all standard potency, striking, and resiliency runes, meaning that they can enchant your gear and transfer runes for the party. At level 9, this increases to them crit succeeding whenever they would normal succeed at crafting a rune. And they do get up to legendary runesmith DCs at higher levels. And of course, as you gain levels, you gain access to more and more powerful runes, like ones that let your friends teleport swap between places, or ones that let you instantly repair a shield mid-combat. Final thoughts on the runesmith? Very interesting, though there are a few things I'm concerned about. First off, the good points. They're very flavorful. I love to see a support utility character, and they can fight if they need to. But they can also sit back and provide utility. There's also a bunch of really cool but useful feats that I would have never thought of, like enchanting a piece of ammunition to draw a rune in the air as it flies towards an enemy. However, like a bard, the runesmith is very contingent on having a particular skill, in their case crafting, but they don't get a free skill increase to crafting like the inventor does. This means that they basically have to invest in crafting to make their base build work, and I'm not fond of that. In addition, they have to have an artisan toolkit to make their build work, and you don't start play with one, at least not one for free. I mean, there are a few feats that fix this, but it seems silly that you can't do your class's base thing without equipment that you don't start with for free. You have to buy it with your starting money. I mean, even a fighter can pick up a club for 0 GP and beat people up, but a runesmith without an artisan toolkit is going to have a real bad time. I have yet to see runes in action, so I don't know how underwhelming or overpowered they are. It seems Paizo has made sure that runesmiths don't really supercharge your damage so much as debuffing enemies or making your allies' defenses stronger, so there's a lot there without breaking the game, probably? Runesmiths also have minor things that I really question, like some runes are attached to certain spell traditions. You can change the rune's tradition if you're trained in the right skill, I guess? I don't really understand why. I guess if you fight an enemy that gets bonuses to save against, say, I don't know, arcane effects, you can switch an effect over to another tradition to bypass that, but like, that's so niche, I wonder how often it will come up. It's flavorful though, so Final thoughts overall? Well, I think some of the classes are pretty powerful, like necromancer and the new magus, while others seem fine, like the runesmith or the summoner. I honestly don't know how the runes will play out in combat. Maybe someone with a galaxy brain can figure out how to hyper-optimize them to ruin the game, or they might just be kind of meh. I'm not the kind of guy that can answer that particular question just by looking at the book. I know that the magus got a quite significant power boost, and I don't think they needed it. They aren't broken or anything now, they're just really good. The summoner, on the other hand, didn't really get much of a boost except for a few more spell slots that aren't their highest level, so they'll probably be relegated to utility stuff. Like the magus, but going in the opposite direction, I don't think this makes them unplayable, just kind of on the lower end of classes. And the necromancer seems really strong. They get a lot of damaging options, a lot of utility options, and they can do all right in melee if they have the right setup, in addition to being a full spellcaster. I don't know, I'd have to see them in play, but it seems like the necromancer and the magus came out of the book winning, and the summoner and the runesmith are, well, they're not losing, but they're breaking even. This metaphor is falling apart. Necromancer and magus powerful, summoner and runesmith solvent, viable but not overachieving. Don't worry, next week I should have another Impossible Magic video going over even more, so stay tuned. But for now, the script is going on 15 pages long, so I think I'm going to call it here. Hey, as a reminder, I have a Patreon. I'm going to try and post something fun there once a month, but honestly, it's just a way to keep this channel financially viable. Just a few bucks a month, and you can help me do things like buy portable microphones so I can do more shorts and on-location shoots. Let me know what you think. I also have a Discord channel. Drop by and say hi, we'd love to talk to you. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That tells not only me, but also YouTube that you like this kind of content and would like to see more. And until next time, thank you, good luck, and happy gaming.